Today we have the fortune of having with us Boaz Golany, who is the Vice President of External Relations and Resource Development at Technion, Israel's Institute of Technology. He's somebody who knows Technion's history and latest developments inside out. Professor Golany, it's a pleasure to have you here with us.
Thank you very much, Ignacio.
So, Professor Golany, could you tell us what is Technion today?
Technion is a science and technology-based university in Haifa, Israel. It's the premier university of its kind in Israel and one of the leading universities in the world in science and technology. We are consistently ranked among the leading universities of our kind worldwide. And in recent years, our position has even improved dramatically with the few Nobel laureates that we have been able to achieve here at the Technion, and because of some international relationship that we have established with many countries, research institutions, universities, and industry.
So could you tell us about the history of Technion and what makes Technion so special?
The Technion is the oldest university in Israel. We were established more than 100 years ago. In 1912 was the laying of the cornerstone of the Technion. We started offering courses and programs in 1924 after World War I, and this is a full generation before the State of Israel was born. We were actually formed by the Zionist movement. So from day one, the mission of the Technion was to support the creation of state and later on to give Israel the technological and engineering know-how that it needs not only to survive but also to grow and become a leading nation. So it's part of our DNA here at the Technion to try to think 10 years or 20 years into the future of what may be needed down the road for Israel and beyond Israel, the rest of the world, and try to provide the solutions to be in time for these challenges. So I can give you many examples. Starting in the early days, in the 1920s, this was a very poor and primitive province, the Ottoman Empire. So the first programs that were launched were in civil engineering, construction, and architecture. So we'll have some people that will know town planning and construction of roads and bridges and buildings for the new state. In the 1930s, the Technion launched mechanical engineering. In those days, the little industry that was here in Israel, mostly held by the British, who followed the so-called mandate over Palestine. So the first Jewish-held industry was supported or promoted by mechanical engineers that came out of the Technion in 1940. And the state was born, the very first department that was built by the Technion in the new campus in the Neve Sha'anan, which is a neighborhood of Haifa, was aeronautical engineering. The year was 1952. In this year, the number of functioning aircraft in Israel was 8. In all of Israel, there were 8 functioning aircraft. But the Technion launched aeronautical engineering, and it took about 2 years to finish the building and start the programs. In the same year, 1954, the Israeli avionic industry was launched. And today, the Israeli avionic industry is the largest employer in the country. Israel is considered a superpower in everything that has to do with air and space technologies. And you can trace 100% of it to the Technion for the very simple reason that to this day, we are the only university in Israel to have an aerospace department. So I'm sure that you and many of you have seen the Iron Dome, which is the missile interception system that Israel developed. A company called Rafael, a large defense contractor here in the Haifa Bay. 100% of the development team in Rafael came to Technion. They are Technion graduates. Moving on to the 1960s, in the early 1960s, the Department of Electrical Engineering at the Technion took a strategic decision to set aside the traditional topic of strong current. This is the production of electricity in the power plant and transferring it over the wires and then distributing it down to the household and industry. So they decided to put it aside and instead focus all their attention on a new area that was emerging in those days, that was microelectronics. So the first Institute of Microelectronics was launched at the Technion in the early 1960s, and the day this institute opened is now considered as the birth of the Israeli high-tech, because the graduates of this institute were the pioneers that established the first Israeli technology companies like Elbit and Elsint and others. And the graduates of this institute were also the people that brought to Israel first multinational corporations in the areas of technology. I'm talking about Motorola, IBM, and Intel. The story of Intel is very telling. A graduate of the Technion by the name of Dov Fruman went to work for Intel in California in the late 1960s. Believe me, those days, even in America, many people had no clue what Intel was about. A few years later, he became homesick. He wanted to come back to Israel. He asked permission from his managers to launch a small bit of Intel in Israel. Permission was granted. He came to Haifa and opened a small office not too far from the Technion, and hired 4 people that he knew from his studies at the Technion. The year was, I think, 1970. And to make a long story short, Intel is now the single largest private employer in Israel, employing more than 8,000 people. About half of them work here in Haifa in a place called IDC, Intel Design Center. And this is the place where Intel designed many of its sophisticated chips, like Centrino and Pentium and Quadra and others, and sold them, of course, worldwide. More than 90% of the people in IDC are Technion graduates and Technion students. And then moving on into the 1970s, the Technion set took, again, a strategic decision to launch a medical school at the Technion. It's quite unusual for a science and technology university such as the Technion to have a medical school. If you look at MIT, for example, they don't have a medical school. So if you read the resolution of the Technion Senate from 1970, authorizing the establishment of a faculty of medicine, it really reads like a prophecy from the Bible. These people wrote that we believe that in 20 or 30 years there will be a convergence between medical technologies and engineering technologies. That is exactly what has been happening since the mid-1990s. And the Technion is in an excellent position to take advantage of this convergence, because we had the collaboration, the very intimate collaboration between the medical school and the engineering. And of course, the first benefits came in 2004 when 2 professors from our Faculty of Medicine were the first scientists in Israel to receive the Nobel Prize. These were Professors Hershko and Chekanover, and they got the prize for the pioneering work they did in the 1970s when Hershko was the supervising professor of Chekanover. And The two of them, together with an American colleague, found the ubiquitin, which is a mechanism that helps the human body get rid of the excess protein. So 2 years or 3 years after the Faculty of Medicine was opened, this team of two people, the professor and his PhD student, were working on a new theory and later a new innovation that paved the way to a Nobel Prize some 30 years later. And of course, there are many other examples that came along the way, and I gave you a brief description to show that the DNA of the place is to look into the future and see what's coming and try to find the solutions now.
Yes, and I think that is a quite a striking story because it shows that even before Israel was conceived or actually existed, you thought about creating a university or several universities actually. So you be building the nation by building the university first. So could you tell us about what is the startup nation? Why is Israel known today as the startup nation? And what was the role of Technion in making that become a reality?
When people call Israel the Start Nation, they refer, of course, the book, the bestseller book of Dan Senor and Saul Zinger, I think from 2006, that described the technological revolution that took place in Israel from the late 1960s to this day. In the first 20 years or so for the state of Israel, from 48 to, let's say, 6 Days War in 1967, we were more or less a third world country with an economy that was based mainly on agricultural products. The top export product for Israel was the Jaffa oranges in those days. And things started to change very rapidly from the 1970s onward. And today, Israel is considered one of the leading countries of the world in terms of entrepreneurship and innovation. There are many different statistics that one may look at. For example, the number of startups in Israel. At any given moment, we have more than 4,000 startups, and that number is second only to the Silicon Valley in California. If you look at the number of patents that are registered in Israel, the number of research papers that are published here, look at the number of Israeli companies that are listed on NASDAQ. We have more Israeli companies listed on NASDAQ than all of West Europe put together. In fact, we are number 3 on NASDAQ after the US first, China second. These are two giant countries, and then tiny little midget Israel comes third, preceding Canada, and as I said, all of Western Europe together. The Technion had a tremendous role in making Israel the startup nation. In fact, our graduates are the backbone for the high-tech Israel. We have about 9,000 undergraduate students, most study in 4-year degrees. So that means that each year we release into the market, so to speak, about 2,200 to 2,400 new graduates. All of them are hired immediately by the high-tech companies in Israel. Many of these companies have their branches and offices not too far from Haifa. There are many industrial parks that are in and around the metropolitan area of Haifa. And of course, all along the coast from Tel Aviv to Haifa, there are hundreds of them. The latest statistics I got is that we have 360 R&D centers of leading technology companies in Israel. And in many of them, you will find young graduates holding key positions. If you look at the Israeli companies listed on NASDAQ, 2/3 of them have Technion graduates holding senior management position, either Chief Technology Officer or Chief Operations Officer or Chief Executive Officer. There was a recent survey by Bloomberg looking at companies that are $1 billion a year or more, and tracing the education that their managers received. The Technion came as number 7 in the world in this particular survey, with Rice University in Houston and MIT. Recently, MIT did another interesting survey on universities that have established the best ecosystem of entrepreneurship and innovation worldwide. They solicited the advice of 64 experts from around the world. Only one of them came from Israel, so we couldn't really influence the results. The Technion came as number 6 in this survey. And then they asked the experts a follow-up question. Can you name the universities that have created the best ecosystem of entrepreneurship and innovation, etc., despite challenging environments? Well, guess what? The Technion came not only as number 1, but number 1 by a wide margin. And when they say challenging environment, of course, they mean the fact sometimes we are threatened here by the security situation around us. You know, recently we had some rockets and missiles flying in the air, but also they refer to the challenging financial constraints that we are faced. Unlike all of our competitors in the US and Canada and elsewhere, our budget is much, much smaller, which means that we have to think out, we have to be more agile, we have to be more efficient, and perhaps to sum up, I would say that now it's very common to say you have to get out of the box. I would say that most of the people in the team have never been inside the box.
So, Professor Golany, this is an amazing story, I think. Could you tell us about the future? Could you tell us about the projects that you're doing to project Technion globally, particularly in New York and China?
A few years ago, about 10 years ago, we decided it's time for us to become a more prominent player in the world stage of higher education. There is a growing trend of globalization in higher education. Just we had globalization in manufacturing many years ago, and then there was globalization in the service economy 20 years ago. Now there is more and more globalization in higher education. So to become more visible on the international scene, we have expanded dramatically the network of collaborations that we have established with different universities and research institutions worldwide. So now we have over 200 agreements with universities on research collaboration, on exchange of students, exchange of faculty, and other types of collaboration. And in the last 3 years, we were able to establish 2 strategic alliances. One of them is in New York, done together with Cornell University. We responded to a call for proposals that was issued by the city of New York to establish a new institute for applied science. And we prepared a joint proposal with Cornell, and our proposal won the competition, even though there were some heavy-duty competitors. Many of the leading US universities were there. So we are building a new university on Roosevelt Island in the East between Queens and Manhattan. There will be a new campus that will be called Cornell NYC Tech. And within this new campus, which will be run by Cornell, we will have a joint venture, a joint institution between Cornell and Technion. The name is Technion Cornell Innovation Institute. Recently, we received a very generous support from John and Erwin Jacobs from California. So the short name of this institute will be the Jacobs Institute. And we will be offering a new line of graduate programs in this institute that hopefully will create major change in the scene of New York. New York hopes to develop a stronger technology sector, just like you have in Silicon Valley or Route 128 around Boston, etc. For that, you need to have a very strong science and technology university that will provide the graduates that will bring those technology companies and lead them. So that's one effort which is underway. Construction started on Roosevelt Island. In the meantime, we are working out of the Google building on the 8th Avenue in Manhattan in the Chelsea area. And hopefully by year 2017, the first building will be up and running on Roosevelt Island, and we will be moving there. And the first programs have already started. We have a master's program and we have a postdoc program that are now on their way. Last year in 2013, we signed another strategic alliance, and this time with the province of Guangdong, China. And this province is right up north from Hong Kong. And we are going to establish the Technion Guangdong Institute of Technology, which will offer programs in English. Most of the students will be Chinese. The faculty will be international. We assume that most of the faculty will be Chinese expatriates who will be attracted to go back to China from positions they now hold in universities in North America and Europe. Before being assigned to China, the new faculty will come here to the Technion for a training period. The Technion is fully responsible for the academic quality of the new institute, which means the diplomas will be Technion diplomas, and all the academic standards of the Technion will apply to the new institute. So you can imagine something like a bridge, with the main pillar of the bridge standing here in Haifa, and one leg in New York and the other leg in China. And now we have created this bridge, and we are looking forward to see a lot of traffic on this bridge. And in addition to these two strategic alliances, we also have many other collaborations with leading universities and research institutions in many other places. So we feel we are very, very busy.
Thank you so much for everything you have shared. I think that we have learned a lot about Technion, and it's a quite inspiring story. It's not only a history of accomplishments, but also a future that is unfolding in front of you, and I think it's incredibly inspiring and enlightening. So thank you so much for everything you have said.
Thank you, thank you. Looking forward to talk to you again in the future. Thanks.
Same here. Thank you.